The elevator doors slid open with a whisper of engineered precision, revealing the marble and gold interior of the Hotel Principe di Savoia's executive level. I stepped inside, my fingers still trembling slightly from the tension of the meeting I'd just concluded with the Calabrian associates. The scent of expensive cologne, something woody with notes of bergamot, clung to my custom Brioni suit as I pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The doors began to close when a hand shot through, triggering the sensor. They reopened to reveal a couple, and my entire world tilted on its axis. Isadora. 8 months. 8 months since I'd signed those divorce papers with a fountain pen that cost more than most people's cars. My signature brutal and final across the bottom of documents that severed us legally, if not emotionally. 8 months since I'd told her, with calculated coldness, that she didn't belong in my world. That her soft heart and artistic sensibilities had no place beside a man whose business required decisions she could never understand or accept. She stood there in a champagne-colored silk dress that moved like liquid against her skin. Her dark hair swept up in a way that exposed the elegant line of her neck. The neck I used to kiss in the quiet hours before dawn when neither of us could sleep. But it wasn't her appearance that drove the air from my lungs. It was the man beside her. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dove-gray suit that screamed Middle Eastern royalty, his hand resting with casual possession at the small of her back. And Isadora, my Isadora, was laughing at something he'd just said, her face tilted toward his with an ease that made my chest constrict. Her eyes met mine as they entered the elevator. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in those amber depths. Recognition, certainly, but nothing else. No anger, no hurt, no residual longing. Just a cool, polite acknowledgement, as if I were a stranger she'd passed in a hotel corridor. "Excuse us," she said, her voice carrying that same refined warmth I remembered, though now it was directed at someone else. The man, this interloper in expensive tailoring, nodded at me with the bland courtesy of someone who had no idea who I was, who I had been to her. The elevator doors closed, sealing the three of us in this gilt-edged cage, and I found myself pressed against the mahogany paneling, suddenly a third wheel in a space I'd entered first. As I was saying, the man continued in lightly accented English, his voice cultured and confident. "The collection your curator recommended is exceptional. My family has been searching for pieces of this caliber for years." "I'm glad the selections meet your expectations, Sheikh Kenji," Isadora replied, and I watched, invisible, as she pulled a tablet from her clutch and swiped through images with the efficiency of someone completely in command of her element. "The Caravaggio is particularly significant, authenticated last year after decades of attribution disputes. Sheikh, of course, money, power, refinement, everything I'd once thought made me worthy of her, now embodied in this stranger who clearly saw what I'd been too arrogant to appreciate when I had it." The elevator climbed smoothly through the floors. 12, 13, 14. I should have said something. Should have acknowledged her presence, forced some kind of interaction. But my throat had closed around words that felt inadequate to the moment. What could I say? That I'd been wrong? That 8 months without her had been 8 months of slowly suffocating in spaces that had once felt like kingdoms, but now felt like empty rooms? Isadora's tablet chimed softly, and she glanced at the notification. "The auction house confirmed the private viewing for tomorrow at 10. Will that suit your schedule?" "Perfect," Sheikh Kenji replied. And then, and this was what unmanned me completely, he leaned closer to murmur something in her ear that made her smile. Not the polite professional smile she'd given me in the lobby of our lawyer's office when we'd signed the papers. This was genuine, reaching her eyes, crinkling the corners in a way I'd once believed was reserved for me alone. The elevator slowed as it approached my floor, the 23rd. I'd chosen this hotel specifically because I owned a stake in it, because the penthouse suite had the kind of security and privacy my business required. Now it felt like a prison I'd built for myself, brick by brick, decision by decision. The doors opened, and I should have exited. Should have walked away with whatever shreds of dignity I could salvage. Instead, I heard myself speak, my voice rougher than I intended. Isadora. She turned, finally looking directly at me for the first time since entering the elevator. Her expression was serene, politely inquiring, the face she might show to an acquaintance whose name she couldn't quite recall. Yes? Not Lucian. Not even Mr. Marchetti. Just yes, as if I were a stranger asking for directions. The doors began to close, their mechanism indifferent to the wreckage of whatever I might have said. Sheikh Kenji pressed the button to hold them open, his expression shifting to something more alert, more protective. "Do you know this man?" he asked Isadora, and there was steel beneath the courtesy. "We were acquainted once," she replied, her tone making it clear just how thoroughly in the past that acquaintance resided. She gave me a small, perfect smile, the kind she might offer to a server who'd brought the check. "I hope you enjoy your stay in Milan, Mr. Marchetti." Then she turned back to the sheikh, resuming their conversation about provenance and purchase prices, and I was dismissed, erased, made irrelevant in the story of her life, with a politeness more devastating than any anger could have been. The elevator doors closed, and I stood in the corridor, my reflection staring back at me from the mirrored wall opposite. Lucian Marchetti, 34 years old, heir to one of the most powerful families in the Italian underworld, worth hundreds of millions in legitimate businesses alone, feared and respected from Rome to Moscow, and completely, utterly destroyed by the silence of a woman I'd thrown away, because I'd been too proud to believe she could be both soft and strong, both artistic and resilient, both separate from my world, and yet the only thing that made it bearable. I walked to my suite on autopilot, my mind already spinning through calculations. Who was Sheikh Kenji? What was his connection to Isadora? And why, 8 months after I'd set her free, did the thought of her in another man's arms make me want to burn down half of Milan to get her back? My phone buzzed with a message from Dario, my second in command. Calabrian deal closed. They agreed to our terms. What's next? I stared at the screen, then typed a single word. Research. Because Lucian Marchetti had built an empire on information, on knowing every angle, every weakness, every pressure point. And if Isadora had moved on, had built a new life in the 8 months since I'd destroyed ours, then I would learn every detail of that life. Not to win her back. I wasn't delusional enough to think I deserved that chance. But because the alternative, the idea of simply letting her disappear into a future that didn't include me, was unbearable. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold as I entered, all marble and glass and carefully curated art that suddenly seemed like the hollow trappings they were. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan from the bar, the ritual automatic, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere in this sprawling metropolis, Isadora was laughing with a sheikh who looked at her the way I should have learned to look at her when I had the chance, with reverence instead of possession, with partnership instead of protection that felt more like a cage. My reflection in the glass looked back at me. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything, all of it worthless compared to what I'd given up. The whiskey burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the burn of her silence, her serenity, her absolute indifference. She hadn't shouted, hadn't cried, hadn't even looked at me with hatred. She'd looked at me like I was nobody, like I meant nothing, and somehow that was worse than anything else she could have done. I pulled out my phone and sent another message to Dario. Find out everything about Isadora Santelli, where she's working, who she's working with, every detail, especially anything about a Sheikh Kenji. The response came quickly. Boss, are you sure that's wise? I wasn't sure of anything anymore, except that 8 months of trying to forget her had failed spectacularly. and seeing her in that elevator had ripped open wounds I'd thought were scarring over. "Just do it," I typed back, because wisdom had never been my strong suit where Isadora was concerned. From the moment I'd met her in that gallery in Florence, her explaining the symbolism in a Botticelli to a group of enraptured tourists, her passion for art lighting her up from within, I'd wanted to own that light, to keep it for myself. And when I couldn't reconcile her softness with the hardness my world required, I'd done what I always did with problems. I'd eliminated the variable. I'd divorced her, told myself it was for her own good, and spent 8 months pretending I'd made the right choice. Now, watching the city lights blur through the expensive glass of my expensive prison, I finally admitted the truth I'd been avoiding since I'd signed those papers. I'd made the worst mistake of my life, and I had no idea how to fix it, or even if it could be fixed. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't let her go again, not without trying. Not without fighting for something I'd been too arrogant to fight for when it mattered. The question was whether she'd give me the chance, or whether her silence, that devastating, dignified silence, would be her final answer. The information came in faster than I expected. Dario's network was efficient, built on years of cultivating contacts in every corner of European society, legitimate and otherwise. By morning, I had a complete dossier on Isadora's life since our divorce, and reading it felt like discovering I'd known nothing about the woman I'd married. Isadora Santelli, 29 years old, was now the most sought-after independent art curator in Europe. Not working for a gallery or museum, she'd built her own consultancy, advising private collectors and institutions on acquisitions, authentications, and sales. Her client list read like a who's who of old money and new power: Russian oligarchs, American tech billionaires, Middle Eastern royalty. Sheikh Kenji El-Rashid was a Qatari prince, heir to a petroleum fortune and a passionate collector of Renaissance art. He'd hired Isadora 6 months ago to help him build what he was calling a cultural bridge between East and West, a private museum in Doha that would house some of the world's most significant Western masterpieces. And he was, according to Dario's sources, also courting her with an intensity that went well beyond professional interest. I sat in my office, a converted 19th century palazzo near the Duomo, and studied the photographs Dario had included. Isadora, at gallery openings in Paris, Rome, London. Isadora having lunch with clients at Michelin-starred restaurants. Isadora attending the Venice Biennale with Sheikh Kenji. The two of them photographed in that same easy intimacy I'd witnessed in the elevator. She'd built this life in 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been telling myself she'd struggle without my protection, she'd created her own empire. One built on expertise and passion rather than fear and force. "There's more," Dario said, entering my office without knocking, a privilege only he enjoyed. He was 52, had been with my father before me, and had the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought or coerced. "The prince is hosting a private dinner tomorrow night. Invitation only. Isadora will be there. She's presenting the final pieces for his museum collection." I looked up from the photographs. "Get me an invitation." Dario's weathered face remained impassive. "Boss, inserting yourself into her professional life." "I didn't ask for advice, Dario. I asked for an invitation." He sighed, the sound carrying decades of watching Marchetti men make decisions they'd later regret. "The dinner is at the prince's suite in the same hotel. The Principe di Savoia." Of course it was. The universe had a sense of irony. "The guest list is carefully vetted," Dario continued. "You'd need a legitimate reason to attend. Some connection to art or culture that would justify your presence." I leaned back in my leather chair, thinking. The Marchetti family had diversified over the years, washing money through legitimate enterprises. Real estate, shipping, hospitality. And, though few knew it, we also owned several small galleries and auction houses across Europe. "The Galleria Marchetti," I said. "We've been acquiring pieces for the new Milan location. I'm a collector with the resources to compete with anyone the prince might be courting. That's my justification." Dario nodded slowly. I'll make the arrangements. But Lucian? He used my first name, something he did only when speaking to me as the boy he'd helped raise rather than the boss he served. What's your end game here? Because if it's to win her back, showing up at her professional engagements uninvited isn't the way. I'm not trying to win her back, I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. I'm protecting an investment. Isadora was my wife. Her reputation reflects on the Marchetti name. I need to ensure she's not being manipulated or put in danger by clients who might have ulterior motives. Even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. Dario's expression said he knew it too. As you wish, he replied, and left me alone with the photographs and my rationalizations. The dinner was black tie, held in a private dining room that had been converted into a showcase for the pieces Isadora had selected. I arrived exactly on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to be rude, and was greeted by Sheikh Kenji's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman who checked my credentials with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to vetting potential threats. Mr. Marchetti, she said, her accent British but her manner pure corporate efficiency. Sheikh Kenji is pleased you could join us. He's heard excellent things about your recent acquisitions for the Galleria Marchetti. I smiled, channeling the version of myself that had closed deals worth hundreds of millions, charming, cultured, completely in control. The Sheikh's reputation as a collector precedes him. I'm honored by the invitation. The dining room was intimate, perhaps 20 guests, all carefully chosen to represent different aspects of the art world. Museum directors, fellow collectors, a few critics whose opinions carried weight in the circles that mattered. And there, at the center of it all, was Isadora. She wore black, a simple sheath dress that should have been understated but instead made her luminous, like a pearl against dark velvet. Her hair was down tonight, falling in soft waves to her shoulders, and she was explaining something to an elderly man I recognized as the director of the Uffizi Gallery, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. She hadn't seen me yet. I accepted a glass of champagne from a server and positioned myself where I could watch her without being obvious, noting the way every person she spoke with leaned in, engaged, captivated. This was her element. Not the quiet dinners in our home where she'd tried to share her passion for art while I'd been distracted by business calls and problems that had seemed so pressing then, so trivial now. Here, she was radiant, confident in her expertise, comfortable in her skin, commanding the room without demanding attention. Mr. Marchetti? I turned to find Sheikh Kenji approaching, his expression pleasant, but his eyes calculating. He'd recognized me from the elevator then. Good. Let him wonder. Sheikh Kenji, I replied, shaking his offered hand with exactly the right amount of pressure. Firm but not aggressive. Thank you for the invitation. Your collection is remarkable. Credit belongs to Ms. Santelli, he replied, gesturing toward Isadora. Her eye is impeccable. Every piece she selected has significance beyond mere aesthetic value. Historical importance, provenance, cultural resonance. She's building not just a collection, but a narrative. He spoke about her with proprietary pride, and I felt something dark and primitive coil in my chest. Jealousy, yes, but also recognition. He saw what I'd failed to see when I had the chance. He valued what I'd dismissed. She's exceptionally talented, I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. You know her work, then? I know her, I said, and watched his expression shift as he processed the implication. Before he could respond, Isadora herself appeared at his elbow, her professional smile in place until she saw who he was speaking with. Then something flickered across her face. Surprise, quickly shuttered, replaced by the same polite neutrality she'd shown me in the elevator. Lucian, she said, and my name in her voice after 8 months of silence was both a gift and a knife. I didn't realize you'd be attending this evening. A last-minute addition to the guest list, I replied. matching her formal tone even as everything in me wanted to pull her aside, to demand answers, to ask why she looked at me like I was a stranger. The Sheikh's collection has garnered significant attention in art circles. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to see it for myself. "How thoughtful," she said, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sheikh Kenji, if you'll excuse me, I should check on the final presentation arrangements." She slipped away before either of us could respond, moving through the crowd with practiced grace. And I was left with the Sheikh, who was now regarding me with considerably more interest. "You were married," he said. Not a question, a statement. 8 months ago, we divorced, amicably. His eyebrow lifted slightly at the last word, as if he doubted its accuracy. "And yet you've come to an event where she's the featured consultant." As I said, her work has garnered attention. The art world is smaller than people realize, Sheikh Kenji. Our paths were bound to cross eventually. Indeed. He studied me with the same intensity I'd seen in the photographs. The look of a man accustomed to assessing value, whether of art or of people. "Ms. Santelli hasn't mentioned you." The words landed like a blow, though his tone was merely observational. Of course she hadn't mentioned me. Why would she? I was the past she'd moved beyond, the mistake she'd corrected. "She's professional," I said. I would expect nothing less. Dinner was announced, and we moved to the table, a long expanse of white linen and crystal that glittered under the chandeliers. I found myself seated, by design or coincidence, directly across from Isadora. Sheikh Kenji was at the head of the table, positioned so he could observe everyone, and I realized this entire evening was a performance, a way for him to showcase not just his collection, but his curator, his acquisition. Throughout the meal, Isadora discussed each piece with expertise and passion, explaining why it mattered, why it belonged in the collection, how it connected to the larger narrative the Sheikh wanted to build. I listened to her voice, watched her hands move, memorized the way she tilted her head when considering a question. And I saw the way Sheikh Kenji looked at her, not with the detached appreciation of an employer, but with the focused interest of a man who'd found something rare and had no intention of letting it go. Jealousy burned through me, irrational and intense. I had no claim on her. I'd given up that right when I'd signed the papers, when I'd told her she didn't belong in my world. But watching another man covet what I'd thrown away was a special kind of torture. When the meal concluded and guests began to circulate again, I waited until Isadora was momentarily alone, examining one of the paintings hanging on the far wall, a small Raphael Madonna, exquisite in its delicacy. "Beautiful," I said, approaching carefully, as one might approach something wild that could bolt at any moment. She didn't turn. "The Sheikh has excellent taste. He has an excellent curator." Now she did turn, her amber eyes meeting mine with that same devastating neutrality. "Was there something you needed, Lucian?" The directness caught me off guard. The Isadora I'd known had been softer in her speech, gentler in her confrontations. This version was armor-plated in politeness, and I didn't know how to penetrate it. "I wanted to congratulate you," I said, "on your success, building a consultancy in less than a year. That's remarkable." "Thank you." 2 words. Polite. Final. Offering nothing. "Isadora. Ms. Santelli, if you don't mind. We're in a professional setting." The correction was delivered without malice, which somehow made it worse. I searched her face for any sign of the woman I'd married, the one who used to wake me in the middle of the night to share some insight about a painting, who'd left post-it notes with art historical jokes on my bathroom mirror, who'd looked at me like I was her entire world. All I saw was a successful, self-possessed woman who had moved on. "Of course," I said. "Ms. Santelli, I apologize for the familiarity." She nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace she might accept a compliment from a stranger. Then she excused herself and returned to Sheikh Kenji's side, leaving me standing alone in front of a Madonna who seemed to observe my failures with sympathetic eyes. I left shortly after, unable to stomach watching Isadora and the Sheikh together any longer. But as my driver navigated the late-night Milan traffic, I made decisions. If Isadora had built a new life, a new career, a new identity separate from me, then I would understand every aspect of it. Not to destroy it, I'd caused enough destruction, but to know her again, this new version she'd become. And if Sheikh Kenji or anyone else thought they could claim her without challenge, they would learn that Lucian Marchetti didn't concede territory he valued. Even if that territory was a woman's heart he'd once broken. Even if she'd made it clear, without ever raising her voice or shedding a tear, that he had no right to fight for it. I pulled out my phone and texted Dario. I need a comprehensive report on every client Isadora is currently working with, every auction she's attending, every gallery opening on her calendar. And I want to know more about Sheikh Kenji, his interests, his weaknesses, his intentions toward her. The response was immediate. Boss, this is stalking territory. I stared at the message, then typed back. No, this is intelligence gathering. There's a difference. Even as I sent it, I knew the line I was crossing, knew that what I was doing was obsessive, potentially destructive, but I couldn't stop. 8 months of her absence had taught me nothing except that I couldn't live without her. And if she wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't acknowledge our history, wouldn't give me a chance to explain or apologize or beg, then I would make her notice me another way. Whatever it took. 3 weeks after the dinner, I'd become a ghost in Isadora's professional life. Invisible, but omnipresent. Every auction she attended, I was there, bidding against her clients, driving up prices on pieces she'd recommended. Every gallery opening she consulted for, I made appearances, my presence noted by society photographers and art world gossips. Every article about her rising success, I ensured the Marchetti name was mentioned nearby, a reminder that we were still connected, still orbiting the same circles. I told myself it was business. The Galleria Marchetti was a legitimate enterprise, and my interest in the art world was genuine, even if it had been dormant during our marriage. But late at night, alone in the penthouse that still smelled faintly of her perfume in the closet where her clothes had once hung, I admitted the truth. I was trying to get her attention by any means necessary, and it was working. Mr. Marchetti, her voice, cool and professional, came through my phone one Thursday afternoon. We need to talk. I'd been in a meeting with the Venetian contacts, discussing territory disputes that seemed absurdly petty compared to the sound of her saying my name. I dismissed everyone with a gesture. Isadora. Ms. Santelli, she corrected. I'm calling because your recent activities are affecting my business. You've bid against 3 of my clients in the past 2 weeks, driving acquisition costs beyond their budgets. You've attended events where your presence serves no clear purpose except to distract from the artists being showcased. And you've had lunch with 2 collectors who were considering your services? I finished. Yes, and I recommended you enthusiastically. Was that also a problem? Silence on the other end, the kind that suggested she was choosing her words carefully, exercising the control that had become her signature. What do you want, Lucian? The question was direct, cutting through the pretense. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Milan skyline, and considered honesty. To talk to you. You won't return my calls. You won't meet with me privately. This seemed like the only way to get your attention. So you're sabotaging my professional relationships? I'm participating in the art world. If that happens to bring us into proximity, don't. Her voice, still controlled, now carried an edge. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is coincidence. You've never cared about art, Lucian. You thought my passion for it was charming, but ultimately frivolous. So this sudden interest is transparent. She was right, of course. During our marriage, I'd indulged her love of art the way one might indulge a child's hobby, supportive but dismissive, never understanding that it was the core of who she was. Perhaps I've changed, I said. People don't change, Lucian. They just reveal who they always were. The words landed with precision, and I wondered which version of me she thought was the revelation. The man who'd married her, or the man who'd divorced her. Meet me for coffee, I said. 1 hour, public place, just to talk. We have nothing to discuss. We have 8 years of marriage to discuss. We have the fact that I made a mistake when I let you go. We have... You didn't make a mistake. Her interruption was sharp, the first real emotion I'd heard from her in weeks. You made a choice. You decided I didn't belong in your world. And you were right. I didn't belong in a world where art was decoration, and love was ownership, and partnership meant I should smile quietly, while you made decisions about both our lives. Each word was a scalpel, precise and devastating. So I built my own world, she continued, her voice steadying. One where my expertise matters, where my choices are respected, where I'm valued for what I know, not for whose wife I am. And in my world, Lucian, you don't have entrance. The line went dead. I sat motionless, her words echoing in the sudden silence of my office. The truth of them was undeniable. I had treated her exactly as she'd described. I'd loved her, yes, but I'd loved her the way I loved my collection of vintage watches. Beautiful things to be protected and possessed, not partners with their own agency and ambitions. My phone buzzed with a message from Dario. The Vienna auction is tomorrow. Isadora will be there representing the Sheikh. Do you still want me to arrange your attendance? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, No. Cancel it. Because if I'd learned anything from that phone call, it was that my current strategy, inserting myself into her professional life, using my resources to create proximity, was achieving the opposite of what I wanted. I wasn't getting closer to her. I was pushing her further away. I needed a different approach. Not force, not manipulation, not the tactics that had served me well in business, but had destroyed my marriage. I needed to actually change, not just claim to. Over the next month, I withdrew from Isadora's orbit entirely. No more auction appearances, no more gallery openings, no more carefully orchestrated coincidences designed to remind her I existed. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I educated myself. I hired Dr. Alessandra Ricci, a professor of art history at the University of Milan, to teach me what Isadora had tried to share during our marriage, and I'd been too arrogant to learn. We met 3 times a week, and she walked me through centuries of artistic evolution, explaining not just who painted what and when, but why it mattered, how art reflected culture, challenged power, preserved memory, gave voice to the silenced. Why this sudden interest? Dr. Ricci asked during our 4th session, her shrewd eyes studying me over her reading glasses. Art history isn't typically the passion of men in your profession. I'm trying to understand someone I failed to understand when it mattered, I replied honestly. She nodded, seeming to accept this. The people we fail to understand are often the ones teaching us the most important lessons, if we're willing to learn them. I learned. I spent hours in the Pinacoteca di Brera, standing before paintings I'd passed 100 times without seeing. I read the books that lined Isadora's side of our home library, the ones I'd never opened. I listened to lectures, attended symposiums, began to grasp the language she'd spoken fluently while I'd nodded along, comprehending nothing. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand what I'd lost. Not just a woman, but an entire dimension of existence I'd been too blind to perceive. Dario watched this transformation with the wary concern of someone who'd seen me obsess before. but never like this. "Boss," he said one evening, finding me in my office at midnight, surrounded by auction catalogs and provenance research. "This isn't healthy." "What isn't?" "Whatever this is." He gestured at the papers covering my desk. "You're not trying to win her back. You're trying to become someone you're not." "Maybe I'm trying to become someone I should have been all along." He shook his head. "Lucian, you are who you are. That's not going to change because you can now identify a Caravaggio from across a room." "Then what do you suggest?" I snapped, frustration bleeding through my carefully maintained control. "That I just accept that I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too stupid to see its value. I suggest you accept that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. That some people, once they leave, don't come back. That maybe the kindest thing you can do for Isadora is let her build her life without you haunting the edges of it." His words were pragmatic, rational, everything I'd have said to someone else in my position. And I rejected them completely. "I can't," I said simply. "I can't let her go. Not without trying everything." "You've tried everything. You've inserted yourself into her business. You've tried to talk to her. I haven't tried actually changing," I interrupted. "Actually becoming someone worthy of her. Someone who understands what she loves and why it matters. Someone who sees her as a partner, not a possession." Dario studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "And you think learning about art history will accomplish that?" "It's a start." "A start toward what, Lucian? She's made it clear she's moved on. The Sheikh is a client," I said, though I had no evidence of this beyond desperate hope. "Nothing more." "You don't know that. I know Isadora. She doesn't confuse professional relationships with personal ones. Unlike me, she has boundaries." "Had boundaries," Dario corrected. 8 months ago. People change, especially after they've been hurt. Especially when someone better comes along. The implication, that Sheikh Kenji might be someone better, landed like a physical blow. Because it was probably true. The Sheikh was cultured, appreciated art, treated Isadora with the respect I'd failed to show. He was everything I wasn't, and everything she deserved, which meant I had to become more than I was. Not to compete with him, but to be worthy of even asking for a second chance. "I need you to arrange something," I told Dario, quietly, anonymously. He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "There's a young artist in Isadora's network, Marco Bellini. He's talented but struggling to get gallery representation. I want you to arrange funding for a solo exhibition. Nothing that can be traced back to me. Use one of our shell corporations. Make it look like a grant from an arts foundation. You want to fund her protégé's career? I want to support what she believes in, without her knowing it's from me." Dario shook his head slowly. "This is either the most selfless thing you've ever done, or the most pathological. I can't decide which. Does it matter? Probably not," he admitted. "I'll make the arrangements." Over the next 6 weeks, I funded 3 more exhibitions for artists in Isadora's network. I anonymously purchased several pieces at auction that she'd recommended to clients who couldn't afford them, then donated them to museums she'd cited in interviews as needing to diversify their collections. I established a scholarship fund for art history students, naming it after her grandmother, the one who'd first taught her to love painting. None of it could be traced to me. None of it could be used to claim credit or curry favor. I was doing what I should have done during our marriage, supporting her passion, elevating her work, making her world better without demanding acknowledgement or control. And through it all, I kept my distance. No contact, no accidental meetings, no pressure. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than negotiating with Sicilian families who spoke only in threats. Harder than expanding territory against rival organizations. Harder than any aspect of the violent, complicated business I'd inherited. Because every day I didn't see her, didn't hear her voice, didn't know what she was doing or who she was with, was a particular kind of torture. But I endured it, because Dario was right about one thing. I couldn't force this, couldn't manipulate or coerce or intimidate my way back into her life. I could only change myself and hope that somehow, eventually, she might notice. 2 months after our phone call, I was finishing a meeting with the Galleria Marchetti's new director, a brilliant curator I'd hired away from the Peggy Guggenheim collection, when my phone buzzed. Isadora's name appeared on the screen, and my heart stopped. "Can you meet me?" The text read, "There's something we need to discuss. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Cafe Verdi." I stared at the message for several seconds, rereading it to confirm it was real, that I hadn't conjured it from desperate wishful thinking. Then I replied, "I'll be there." Cafe Verdi was Isadora's choice, and that told me everything. It was a small establishment near the Brera district, frequented by artists and students, worlds away from the high-end venues where our previous encounters had occurred. Neutral ground, but ground she controlled through familiarity. I arrived 15 minutes early, which was unlike me. I was a man who made others wait, who used punctuality as a power play. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was Isadora, and the usual rules didn't apply. She appeared exactly at 3, wearing jeans and a cream sweater, her hair in a simple ponytail. She looked younger than at the formal events, more like the woman I'd married before I'd turned our relationship into a series of performances and power struggles. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. A waiter appeared, and she ordered an espresso without consulting me, which was oddly reassuring. She wasn't trying to manage my comfort, wasn't performing for me. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show," she admitted once the waiter left. "After everything." "I'll always show up for you," I said, then immediately regretted the presumption. "I mean, I know what you meant." She folded her hands on the table, and I noticed she wasn't wearing rings. She'd worn them during our marriage. A collection of vintage pieces she'd found at estate sales, each with a story she'd shared with me while I'd only half listened. Now her fingers were bare. "I've been hearing things," she said, "about anonymous funding for emerging artists, about collections being donated to museums, about scholarships established in my grandmother's name." My chest tightened. I'd been so careful to keep it untraceable, to ensure she wouldn't know. "I'm not sure what this has to do with me," I said carefully. "Lucian." She said my name with a mixture of exasperation and something that might have been amusement. I've spent my entire professional life researching provenance, tracing ownership through layers of deliberate obscurity. Did you think I wouldn't eventually trace the shell corporations back to Marchetti Holdings? I had no response to that. She'd outmaneuvered me with her own expertise, which was somehow both humiliating and impressive. "Why?" she asked. "Why fund my artists, donate to my causes, establish scholarships in my family's name? What's the end game, Lucian?" The espresso arrived, providing a momentary reprieve. I watched her add sugar, stir precisely 3 times. The same ritual I'd witnessed 1,000 mornings during our marriage, and realized there was no point in strategy or deception. "There's no endgame," I said. "Or if there is, it's the hope that maybe, eventually, you'll believe I've changed. People don't change. You said that before. But what if you're wrong? What if people can learn, can grow, can become better versions of themselves?" She sipped her espresso, studying me over the rim of the cup. "And you think you've become a better version of yourself?" "I think I'm trying to. I've spent the past 3 months learning everything I should have learned when we were married. About art, about culture, about why these things matter. Not to impress you or win you back, but because I finally understand that I failed you, not just as a husband, but as a person who claimed to care about you. while never bothering to understand what you cared about. She set down her cup carefully. You hired Dr. Ricci. It wasn't a question, and I realized Isadora's network in the Milan art world must have informed her of my educational endeavors. I did. Why? Because you tried to share your passion with me for 8 years, and I was too arrogant to listen. Because I wanted to understand what I'd dismissed. Because I stopped, choosing words carefully. Because loving you meant I should have loved what you loved, not just tolerated it. Loved. She focused on the past tense. Past tense. Love, I corrected. Present tense. Continuous tense. However grammar works, that hasn't changed. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup in patterns I'd once known by heart. You hurt me, she said finally, her voice soft but clear. Not with violence or cruelty in the traditional sense, but with dismissal. With making me feel like everything I valued was frivolous compared to your world. With loving me, but not respecting me, which might be worse than not loving me at all. Each word was a blade, but I deserved every cut. I know. And you think funding some exhibitions and taking art history classes fixes that? No. I met her eyes. I think it's the beginning of trying to become someone who wouldn't make those mistakes again. Someone who sees you as an equal, not an acquisition. Someone who understands that your world has just as much value as mine. Probably more. She laughed, but without humor. Probably more, still measuring, still comparing. Even in your apology, Lucian, you can't help but rank things. She was right, and the realization was like ice water. Even in trying to change, I was falling back into old patterns. You're right, I said. I'm sorry. Your world has value. Period. Not in comparison to anything else. It has inherent value because it matters to you. Because art matters. Because culture and beauty and meaning matter. I should have seen that from the beginning. She searched my face, and I let her look, hiding nothing. Let her see the regret, the longing, the desperate hope that maybe this conversation was leading somewhere other than final closure. Sheikh Kenji asked me to marry him, she said abruptly. The world tilted. I'd known this was possible, probable even, but hearing it stated so baldly was different from knowing it theoretically. And, I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears, and I told him I needed time to think about it. Not yes, not yet. The relief was dizzying. He's a good man, she continued. He respects my work. He values my expertise. He's building something beautiful in Doha, and he wants me to be part of it. Not as a wife who stays home, but as a partner who helps shape his cultural vision. Everything I should have offered her and hadn't. He sounds perfect for you, I said, the words costing me everything. He does, doesn't he? She smiled, but it was sad. Everything I thought I wanted. Everything you weren't. Then why haven't you said yes? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the cafe's ambient noise. Because I don't love him. I respect him. I enjoy working with him. But I don't love him. And after being married to someone I loved but who didn't respect me, I'm not sure I can marry someone I respect but don't love. Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered to life in my chest. Isadora. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything. I didn't tell you this to give you hope or to invite you back into my life. I told you because you asked why I haven't accepted his proposal, and I'm trying to be honest. About everything. Then let me be honest too, I said. I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go. Not because I lost a wife, but because I failed you. I failed to see what I had, to value it, to cherish it. And I've spent 8 months trying to forget you, and 3 months trying to become someone worthy of even asking for forgiveness. Is that what you want? Forgiveness? I want you, I said. I want another chance. I want to show you that I can be the partner you deserved all along. But I know I have no right to ask for any of that. So yes, if forgiveness is all you can offer, I'll take it. I'll take whatever you're willing to give. She stood then, gathering her bag, and panic seized me. This couldn't be how it ended, with her walking away while I'd finally been honest. I need to think, she said. About a lot of things. About Kenji's proposal. About your transformation, if that's what it really is. About what I want for my future. Can I see you again? I asked. Just to talk? I don't know if that's wise. Probably not, I agreed. But I'd like to try anyway. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once. I'll think about it. And then she was gone, leaving me at the small table with 2 empty espresso cups and a heart that felt simultaneously crushed and hopeful. Dario was waiting when I returned to the office, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said. The Calabrian families are moving against us. They think your distraction with personal matters has left vulnerabilities in our territory. For years, this would have been my first priority, protecting the business, maintaining power, crushing threats before they could materialize. Now, I felt only detachment. Handle it, I told him. Use whatever resources necessary. I trust your judgment. He stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. You want me to handle a territorial dispute without your direct involvement? I hired you for your expertise, Dario. I should have been trusting it all along rather than micromanaging everything. Deal with the Calabrians. I have more important things to focus on. More important than territory disputes? Yes. Than business? Yes. Than any of it? I met his eyes. I let the best thing in my life slip away because I thought all of this mattered more. I'm not making that mistake twice. For the first time in the 20 years I'd known him, Dario smiled. Genuinely smiled. Not the grim professional expression he usually wore. It's about time you figured that out, boss. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended anticipation, waiting for Isadora to contact me, to tell me she'd thought about it, to give me an answer of any kind. The silence was worse than rejection would have been. I continued my education with Dr. Ricci, read everything I could find that Isadora had written or been quoted in, tried to understand the woman I'd married and failed to know, and I made a decision. If she chose Sheikh Kenji, if she decided that a man who'd respected her from the beginning was better than a man trying to learn respect after the fact, I would accept it. I would withdraw completely. No more interference. No more sabotage. No more haunting the edges of her life. But not before I said everything I needed to say. I drafted a letter, not an email, not a text, but an actual letter written by hand on thick paper. I rewrote it 7 times before I was satisfied, and even then, it felt inadequate to what I wanted to express. I was sealing the envelope when my phone rang. Isadora's name on the screen. I answered, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Hello. Can you meet me tomorrow? She asked. Same place, same time? I'll be there. Good. We need to talk about what happens next. The line went dead, and I sat holding the phone, the letter in my other hand, wondering if what happens next meant goodbye, or something else entirely. Either way, tomorrow would change everything. Again. I arrived at Cafe Verdi 30 minutes early this time, the letter folded in my jacket's inner pocket like a talisman. The same waiter from before nodded in recognition, and I wondered if he knew he was witnessing the slow-motion collapse and possible resurrection of my life. Isadora arrived precisely on time again, this time in a navy dress that reminded me of the one she'd worn to the gallery opening where we'd met 12 years ago. Before marriage, before I'd ruined everything. "Thank you for coming," she said, taking the same seat as before. The waiter brought her espresso without asking, suggesting she'd been here often enough to have a usual order. "I have something to say first," I told her, pulling out the letter. "Before you tell me whatever you've decided, I wrote this because I needed to say it properly, without interruption or improvisation." She took the envelope, her expression wary but curious. "Should I read it now?" "Only if you want to." She opened it carefully, and I watched her eyes track across the handwritten lines. I'd memorized every word. Isadora, for 8 years, I had everything, and I understood nothing. I had a wife who saw beauty in the world and tried to share it with me. I had a partner who challenged me to be better, and I resented the challenge. I had love freely given, and I treated it as a commodity to be managed rather than a gift to be cherished. You asked me once what I was afraid of. I told you nothing, because that's what men in my position are supposed to say. The truth I was too cowardly to admit then. I was afraid that if I truly saw you, truly understood the depths of your mind and the strength of your spirit, I would realize how inadequate I was by comparison. So I dismissed what I didn't understand. I minimized what threatened me. I made you smaller in my mind, so I could feel larger, and in doing so, I diminished us both. You were right when you told me I don't have entrance to your world. I forfeited that right when I failed to respect the woman who built it, but I'm writing to you now not to ask for that entrance back, but to tell you what I've learned in your absence. That love without respect is possession, not partnership. That beauty and meaning aren't frivolous. They're what make existence bearable. That you were never the one who didn't belong in my world. I was the one who didn't deserve to belong in yours. I've spent 3 months trying to understand what I failed to see. Not to win you back, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope for that. But because I owed it to you, to the woman who tried for 8 years to share herself with me while I was too blind to see. If you choose Sheikh Kenji, I'll understand. He saw your value from the beginning. He built his partnership with you on respect. He deserves what I took for granted. But if there's any part of you that remembers who we were before I broke us, that wonders if I've truly changed, that's willing to risk being hurt again, I'm here. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll earn back your trust however you need me to. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I finally understand what you tried to teach me. You told me that in your world, I don't have entrance. You were right. But I'm not asking for entrance anymore. I'm asking for the chance to stand outside the door and prove I'm someone worth letting in. Yours, if you'll still have me, Lucian. She read it twice, her expression carefully neutral. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This is beautiful," she said softly, "and terrible, because it's exactly what I needed to hear 8 years ago, and I don't know if hearing it now changes anything." The words felt like a door closing, and I forced myself to accept them. "I understand. Do you?" She set the letter down carefully. "Because I'm not sure I do. I've spent 8 months building a life without you, a good life, a successful life. And in one letter, you've reminded me of everything I lost, everything I still—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I told Kenji I couldn't marry him." My heart stopped. "Why?" "Because I realized something while reading your letter. You say love without respect is possession. But respect without love is just professional courtesy. And I deserve both. I deserve someone who sees me completely, who loves me entirely, who respects what I do, and who I am. I want to be that person, I said. I know I wasn't before, but that's the problem, Lucian. I don't know if you've changed or if you've just gotten better at saying what I need to hear. I don't know if this transformation is real or if it's just another strategy, another way to get what you want. How can I prove it's real? She laughed, but it was bitter. That's the thing. You can't. Trust isn't something you can prove with grand gestures or written declarations. It's built in small moments over time. And we don't have time. You destroyed that when you divorced me. Then give me time now, I said. However much you need. I'll wait. For how long, Lucian? A month? 6 months? A year? And what happens when you get impatient, when I'm not coming back fast enough? Do you start sabotaging my clients again? Do you insert yourself into my life until I have no choice but to deal with you? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. That had been my initial strategy, and it had failed spectacularly. I won't, I said. I'll give you space. Complete space if that's what you need. No contact, no interference, no pressure, just... I struggled to find words that wouldn't sound manipulative. Just know that I'm here, that I've changed, or I'm trying to, that I finally understand what I lost. She stood, gathering her bag, and I recognized the finality in the gesture. I need to think, she said, about everything, about whether I can trust this change, whether I even want to, about what I want my life to look like going forward. Can I ask you something? I said as she prepared to leave. One question. Do you still love me? Even a little? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I never stopped loving you, Lucian. That's the problem. But love isn't enough. It wasn't enough to keep you from breaking us. And I'm not sure it's enough to fix what you broke. Then she was gone, leaving me with a letter that had failed to save us, and the knowledge that she still loved me but might choose to walk away anyway. The next weeks were the hardest of my life. I kept my promise. No contact, no interference, complete withdrawal from her orbit. It was torture, especially when Dario's reports indicated she was traveling extensively, meeting with new clients, building her consultancy into something even more impressive than it had been. She's in Paris this week, Dario would mention casually, or she's keynoting at a symposium in London, or she's been approached by the Getty about a position. Each update was a reminder that Isadora's life was continuing, expanding, thriving without me in it. I focused on my own transformation, not as a strategy to win her back, but because I'd committed to it, and because somewhere in the process, I'd discovered I genuinely valued what I was learning. Dr. Ricci and I finished our sessions, but I continued studying on my own, visiting museums not because Isadora might be there, but because I was beginning to understand what she'd tried to teach me. That art wasn't decoration or investment, but meaning made visible. 2 months passed with no word from her. I was beginning to accept that her silence was her answer when my phone rang at 2 a.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Lucian? Isadora's voice, shaking and urgent. I need help. I was on my feet instantly, every protective instinct roaring to life. Where are you? What's wrong? I'm at the hospital, Villa Maria. There was an accident. Someone tried to force me off the road. I'm okay, just shaken. But the police are asking questions about whether I have enemies, and I didn't know who else to call. I'm on my way. Don't talk to the police until I get there. And Isadora. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, already moving. Are you really okay? Are you hurt? Just bruised, scared. Lucian, they weren't trying to steal my car. They were trying to... Her voice broke. They were trying to hurt me specifically. Ice flooded my veins. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Stay in the emergency room where there are people. I'm sending Dario ahead with security. I made the calls as I drove, Dario to the hospital with 4 of our best men, my lawyer to deal with the police, my contacts in the department to find out what they knew about the incident. By the time I arrived, Dario had established a perimeter, and my lawyer was already dealing with the detective asking questions. I found Isadora in a private examination room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm night, her face pale but composed. "Tell me everything," I said, pulling a chair close to her bed. She did. How she'd been driving back from a late meeting with a client, how the black SUV had appeared from nowhere, how it had tried to run her off the road 3 times before she'd managed to get onto a busy street where witnesses made them back off. "Did you get a license plate?" "Partial. The police have it. I already had people running it through channels the police couldn't access. Within an hour, I'd have a name, an address, and a very short timeline before whoever had tried this disappeared." "This is because of me," Isadora said quietly. "Isn't it? Someone trying to get to you by hurting me?" The guilt was immediate and crushing. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out." "I left you, Lucian. We're divorced. Why would anyone think hurting me would affect you?" "Because it would destroy me, and anyone who'd been watching closely enough would know that." "I'll handle it," I said. "You're safe now. Dario's men will stay with you, and I'll have someone escort you wherever you need to go until we've identified the threat and eliminated it." Eliminated it. She repeated my words with something like fear. "This is what I left, Lucian. This violence, this danger, and it's followed me anyway. I'm sorry." The words were inadequate. "I'm so sorry, but I promise you whoever did this won't get another chance. I'll make sure of it." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw calculation behind the fear. "If you do this, if you protect me, eliminate this threat, fix this problem, I'm back in your world, aren't I? Back in your debt. Back in a position where I owe you." "No." I took her hand carefully, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. "You don't owe me anything. This is my responsibility because my world created the danger. Protecting you from consequences of knowing me isn't a favor you owe me. It's the bare minimum of decency I should have provided all along." Her fingers tightened on mine. "I'm scared. I know. But I've got you, and I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever again." It was a promise I had no right to make given my history of hurting her myself, but it was one I intended to keep. By morning, I had answers. The attempted hit had been ordered by the Calabrians, retaliation for the territorial dispute Dario had handled in my absence. They'd targeted Isadora specifically because their intelligence had indicated she was my weakness. They weren't wrong. "How do you want to handle it?" Dario asked, his expression grim. "Retaliation? Negotiation? Or do we make an example?" I looked at Isadora, who'd finally fallen asleep in the hospital bed, her face still too pale, one hand clutching the blanket like a shield. "Negotiation," I said, surprising both of us. "I'll meet with them personally. We'll draw new boundaries. And I'll make it clear that Isadora is off limits, that anyone who touches her answers to me, regardless of our marital status." "That's going to invite questions," Dario warned. "About whether she's still important to you. Let them question. The answer is yes. She'll always be important to me, and anyone who doesn't understand that is welcome to test my commitment to that statement." The meeting with the Calabrians was tense but productive. I offered concessions I wouldn't have considered before. Territory I'd fought for, revenue streams I'd protected, in exchange for one inviolable agreement. Isadora Santelli was untouchable. Attack her, and face the combined retaliation of every Marchetti resource. They agreed, though their leader, a brutal man named Tommaso, studied me with something like amusement. "You gave up a lot for an ex-wife, Marchetti." I gave up things that can be replaced for someone who can't be. If you think that makes me weak, you're welcome to test that theory." He smiled, showing teeth. "No need. I understand the value of priorities, and I respect a man who knows what he's willing to fight for." When I returned to the hospital, Isadora was awake, talking with Dario. "It's handled," I told her. "You're safe. The threat has been eliminated." "Eliminated how?" she asked carefully. "Negotiation, agreement, protection." I didn't elaborate on the cost. The territory I'd conceded, the power I'd traded for her safety. But Dario, damn him, did. "He gave them the northern port access and the shipping routes we've been fighting over for 2 years," he told Isadora, "in exchange for a promise that you're untouchable." She stared at me. "You gave up, Lucien. That was worth millions. And you're worth more." The words hung in the air between us, simple and absolute. Isadora's eyes filled with tears. "You can't do this. You can't make grand gestures and expect—" "It's not a gesture," I interrupted. "It's reality. I learned something these past months. Everything I thought mattered, the territory, the business, the power, means nothing without you. So yes, I gave up some shipping routes. I'd give up all of it if it meant you were safe." "Why?" she whispered. "After everything, why do you still—" "Love you," I finished. "Because you're you. Because 8 years of marriage and 8 months of separation taught me that everything I built means nothing if I can't share it with the person who makes it worthwhile. Because I'm done pretending I can live without you." She was crying openly now, and I wanted to hold her but wasn't sure I had the right. "I'm so tired of being angry," she said through tears. "So tired of protecting myself from you. But I don't know if I can trust this. Trust you. What if you change back? What if this is temporary? Then judge me by my actions, not my words. I've spent 3 months learning what you tried to teach me. I've spent the last 2 hours proving that you matter more than business. Let me spend the next year, the next decade, the rest of my life showing you that this change is permanent." She looked at me for a long moment, tears still streaming down her face. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. But slowly. We start over, build trust, see if this can actually work." "Starting over sounds perfect," I said. And finally, I pulled her into my arms, holding her carefully as she cried against my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a chance, and that was more than I deserved. The rebuilding happened in increments so small they were almost invisible. Coffee meetings that became lunches, lunches that became dinners, dinners that became long walks through Milan discussing art and business, and everything we'd missed in each other's lives. Isadora set the pace, and I followed, patient in a way I'd never been before. When she needed space, I gave it without complaint. When she wanted to talk, I listened without trying to fix or control. When she shared her fears about trusting me again, I acknowledged them rather than dismissing them. "This is different," she said one evening, 3 months into our careful reconstruction. We were in her apartment, a space I'd never seen, decorated with her art and her taste, no trace of my influence. "You're different. Or maybe you're finally seeing who I should have been all along," I replied. "Maybe." She was curled on her sofa, a book about Baroque painting in her lap, but I'm still scared. What happens when the newness wears off? When I frustrate you or disagree with you? Will you revert to the man who thought his way was the only way? I hope not. But Isadora. I set down my own book, an analysis of Caravaggio's use of light that Dr. Ricci had recommended. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can only promise I'll recognize them faster and correct them sooner, that I'll listen when you tell me I'm wrong, that I'll value your perspective as much as my own. She studied me with those amber eyes that saw everything. "You gave up the Calabrian territories for me." "I did. Dario says it's caused problems with your position, made some of the families question your priorities. Let them question. My priorities are exactly where they should be. And if they challenge you? If this costs you the business you've built? I crossed to the sofa, sitting beside her carefully, not touching, but close enough to feel her warmth. Then it costs me the business. Isadora, I spent 34 years building an empire. It took me 8 months without you to realize that empire means nothing if I'm alone in it. I'd rather have you and nothing else than have everything without you. She was quiet for a long moment. I told Sheikh Kenji about us, about you, about the fact that we're trying again. My chest tightened. What did he say? He asked if I was sure, if I could really trust someone who'd hurt me before. And I told him I wasn't sure, but I was willing to try. She smiled slightly. He said if you hurt me again, he'd personally fund a collection of art dedicated to exposing powerful men who abuse their positions. He's very creative with his threats. I like him more already, I said, meaning it. And he's not wrong to worry. I did hurt you. I don't deserve this second chance. No, she agreed. You don't. But I'm giving it to you anyway because I've learned something too. I'm strong enough to walk away if you betray my trust again. I don't need you, Lucian. I want you. There's a difference. The distinction was everything. She wasn't staying because she was trapped, or dependent, or afraid to be alone. She was choosing me, actively, with full knowledge of who I'd been, and cautious hope about who I was becoming. I won't betray that trust, I promised. Not again. 6 months after we began rebuilding, Isadora invited me to her gallery, a space she'd recently acquired in the Brera district, currently empty except for the potential she saw in its bones. I want your opinion on something, she said, her voice carefully casual. If you're interested. We walked through the space together, and she explained her vision. Not a traditional gallery, but a rotating exhibition space focused on emerging artists, a place where talent could be showcased regardless of commercial viability or establishment connections. It's risky, she admitted. I'll need significant funding, and the return on investment isn't guaranteed. But I think Milan needs a space like this, where art is valued for meaning rather than market price. It's brilliant, I said, meaning it. Exactly the kind of project that would have terrified me before because I couldn't control the outcome. Now I just see how perfectly it reflects who you are. She smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time in months, genuine pleasure not tempered by caution. Would you want to invest? She asked. Not as a silent partner or a favor, but as an actual partner. Someone who helps make decisions, who shares the risk and the vision. The offer meant more than money or business. It was trust. It was partnership. It was a chance to build something together as equals. I'd be honored, I said. On one condition. You make all the curatorial decisions. This is your vision, your expertise. I can handle logistics, funding, security, but the art, the direction, the meaning, that's yours. She turned to face me fully, and I saw tears in her eyes. You really have changed. I've learned, I corrected, from the best teacher I could have had. The kiss, when it happened, felt like coming home. Soft and careful, but with the promise of more, of rebuilt intimacy and hard-won trust. We didn't rush it. We took our time, rebuilding not just our relationship but ourselves, becoming people who could be together without destroying each other. 2 years after that elevator encounter in the Hotel Principe di Savoia, Isadora's gallery opened to critical acclaim. The first exhibition featured Marco Bellini, the young artist whose career I'd anonymously supported, and the opening night was packed with collectors, critics, and artists, all celebrating not just the work, but the space itself. I stood to the side, watching Isadora move through the crowd with confidence and grace, explaining pieces, making introductions, creating connections. This was her element, and I was merely a guest in it, supporting but not controlling, present but not possessive. "You look happy," Dario observed, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine. "I am," I said, accepting the glass. "For the first time in years, I actually am." "She's good for you. Makes you better. She always did. I was just too stupid to see it. And now I see it, and I work every day to deserve it." Isadora caught my eye across the room and smiled. And in that smile, I saw everything we'd lost and found again. Not the same as before, but better for having been broken and rebuilt. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and we were locking up the gallery together, she took my hand. "Lucian?" "Yes?" "I love you." Present tense, continuous however grammar works. The words, so similar to what I'd said to her months ago, made my chest tighten with emotion. "I love you too," I replied. "And I promise—" "Don't promise," she interrupted gently. "Just be. Be the person you've become. Be the partner I need. Be present and honest and willing to grow. That's all I ask." "I can do that," I said. And I did. We remarried 2 years later in a small ceremony attended by people who mattered. Dario, Dr. Ricci, Sheikh Kenji, who gave Isadora away with his blessing, artists from her network, a few family members I'd actually learned to connect with properly. No elaborate displays of wealth, no power plays or strategic guest lists. Just 2 people committing to partnership, to respect, to love that had been earned rather than assumed. During our vows, I promised to see her, to value her, to build with her rather than for her. She promised to trust me, to call me out when I failed to keep those promises, to love me even when it was hard. "In your world," I said during my vows, "I asked for entrance. You told me I didn't have the right. You were correct. So I spent 2 years learning to deserve that entrance. But I realize now that it was never about getting into your world. It was about building a world together, one where we both belong, where we both have equal say, where partnership means exactly that." She was crying, we both were, when she replied, "I built my world without you because I thought I had to choose between being respected and being loved. You taught me, painfully and slowly, that I deserve both. So I'm not giving you entrance to my world, Lucian. I'm merging it with yours, creating something new, something ours." Silence had brought us to this point. Her silence in the elevator that had destroyed my arrogance. My silence as I learned to listen rather than speak. Our shared silence as we rebuilt trust one careful moment at a time. But this silence, standing before friends and family with our hands joined and our futures intertwined, was different. This was the silence of understanding, of completion, of 2 people who had finally learned what the other had been trying to say all along. I was 38 now, and Isadora was 32. We'd lost years to my pride and ignorance. But we had decades ahead to build what we should have had from the beginning. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared passion, and love that had been tested and proven. "You may kiss your bride," the officiant said, and I did, sealing promises I fully intended to keep. Later, at the small reception in Isadora's gallery surrounded by art she'd curated and people she'd chosen, I found myself standing alone for a moment, watching my wife laugh with Sheikh Kenji about something only they understood. Dario appeared beside me. "Any regrets?" "Only that it took me so long to get here," I replied honestly. "But no regrets about this." "Good. Because she'll leave you again if you mess it up." "I know. And I did know, which was perhaps the best guarantee I could offer. The knowledge that her love was freely given and could be freely withdrawn, that I had to earn it every day through action rather than assumption. "Lucian," Isadora's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She extended her hand. Come. There's someone I want you to meet, an artist from Prague who's doing incredible work with light and shadow. I think you'll appreciate the Caravaggio influences. I took her hand, letting her lead me toward this new introduction, this new connection, this moment in the life we'd built together. In another life, I would have dismissed her enthusiasm, or controlled the interaction, or found a way to assert dominance. In this life, I simply listened as she explained what made the artist's work significant, watched her face light up with passion, and thanked whatever forces had given me a second chance to love her properly. From a silence in an elevator, we'd created a language of our own. From destruction, we'd built something stronger. From my refusal to see her value, I'd learned to appreciate every facet of the woman I'd almost lost forever. And from the ashes of our first marriage, we'd created something new, not perfect, but real. Not without struggle, but with the commitment to face that struggle together. What are you thinking? Isadora asked softly as we stood together later, watching the last guest depart. That I'm the luckiest man alive, I replied honestly. That you gave me something I didn't deserve and I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. She smiled, leaning into my shoulder. You're worthy of it now. That's what matters. And in that moment, surrounded by art she loved and had taught me to love, in a space we'd built together as true partners, I finally believed her. The silence that had destroyed me had also saved me. It had forced me to listen, to learn, to change in ways I'd never thought possible. And now, with Isadora beside me and decades stretching ahead of us, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. Love without respect is just possession. But love with respect, that's partnership. That's everything. That's what we'd built from the ruins of what I'd destroyed. And I would never take it for granted again.